There ain't nothing like the sound of bloodhounds on a hot trail at the crack of dawn to set the heart to pumping. This morning ain't no different, but that weren't what got my heart to pumping on that soft summer's day. No, what got me going was knowing that them dogs were only chasing the ghost of Moses that morning, thanks to the borrowed clothes and the generous use of rabbit grease to send them on a wild goose chase. You know, I ain't never been real fond of no dogs, but I'm specially obliged to give bloodhounds a wide berth. That's been my way ever since I was a wee little girl, no more than 6 years old, on the Borders plantation. It was around that time Master Edward Borders decided I was strong enough to work for money, so he hired me out to a neighbor lady named Miss Susan to take care of her baby and clean the house. She wasn't no kind lady. She used to whip my little legs when I was slow getting the baby to sleep. That was most every night. Then come Fridays, I'd always get a whipping if I got caught looking out the window while waiting for my brother to come walk me back to our cabin. But I missed my family and I never felt welcome at Mrs. Susan's, and I got caught a lot. So my brother was always a welcome sight for sore eyes. One night on the walk home, my brother and I heard dogs bark and something fierce in the woods. They sounded close, like they was after us. So naturally I was scared. I grabbed hold of my brother's hand, screaming, "They're gonna get us, Robert. The dogs is gonna eat us alive." Robert picked me up and put me on his back, shushing me with his words, "Not tonight, Minty." Minty was my childhood pet name, short for my given name, Arminta. Minty, he said, "Them dogs ain't got the scent or taste for you tonight." "How you be sure?" I asked him. Robert breathed heavy, then said, "They is on the trail of a runaway, Minty, and tonight that ain't you." Sure enough, we got home that night without the bloodhounds bothering us, and every night after that up until I was about 8 years old. When I was 8, I was hired out again, this time to work in the kitchen of another household. My mom, Harriet Green, well, folks called her Rit, was a cook at the big house, and I was pretty much by her side in the kitchen till I was 5. So Master Borders' reason to hire me out to kitchen job in a fine house with carriages, and it would be as good as a job that I could get anywhere. Still, I longed to be back home. I missed my time running from house to field, bringing word from the master to the overseer or some other hand. I'd tarry in the fields as often as I could with my kin, carrying a kitchen morsel or two, sent in secret from my mom to ease their hunger. And all truth be told, despite my fine working surroundings in the new household, they was a fussy bunch. Every once in a while, I would hear the master speaking angrily about abolitionists. I didn't have no idea who or what these were, but I soon found out that abolitionists were soundly hated by slaveholders. One day, while my master was having another argument over whether supper ought to be served with Sally Loon, sweetbread, or Johnny cakes, I took a lump of sugar, which I'd never tasted before. Well, my mistress found out, and being afraid of the punishment, I ran away. For 3 days, I found shelter in a pig pen where I had to compete with pigs for scraps of food. It was that third night that Master Borders set the bloodhounds on my scent for the first time. I remember the loud barking and the awful snarling. Next thing I knew, they was on top of me. The lead hound went from my face. I can recall the horrible weight of her as she pushed me down into the back of the pig pen. I don't remember much after then, except the sound of my mom's voice and that of my grandma Modesty pleading for the master to call off the dogs. Since that time, I done spent as much time awake as sleep avoiding bloodhounds at all cost. Looking back, those days I spent around the pig pen weren't all that bad, the way I look at it, because I was outside, which is where I preferred to be, where as a child I felt the most at home and free. Now, I done seen the older children, my sister Lena, Mariah, Reddy, Sophie, and my brother Robert working hard in the fields, and I was told that field work was not easy. Picking cotton, cotton all day with the sun burning down sometimes makes you dizzy, they'd say. But I was glad to be outside with my kinfolks, because when the overseer couldn't hear us, we would walk and talk and pray and sing about freedom. Alone as a wee girl, I thought very little about being free. I thought living in cabins and working on the plantation was the way things had to be. We was always in fear of the overseer who would snap a whip of leather thongs, but when the bunch of us was together, Lena, Mariah, Reddy, Sophie, Robert, Ben, Rachel, and Henry, well, we was out in the wide open air. My mama would say, someday we be free. Grandma Modesty told us of free people in Africa. Then comes slavery, she would say. And the people lived in misery on their journey on the waves of the sea, and they become sick because they could no longer breathe and smell the sweet scent of Africa, she would say. The master promised me, soon again we'll be free. It was those times together that birthed in me a desire to taste freedom. The word freedom, soon began to sound like music to my ears. Still gay. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. Grandma Modesty had come from Africa in a slave ship across the transatlantic slave trade. She was an Ashanti from Guyana or the Ivory Coast. Grandma Modesty was sold by Antelope Patterson. And Antelope Patterson, Grandmama Modesty said, wrote in his will that writ my mom and her children was to be manumitted when they turned 45 years old. I heard this tale year after year till I was nearly 12 years old. By then, Grandma Modesty had told us many more stories about being free in Africa. She also told us that Rit's daddy was a white man and that had done invaded her privacy on the Patterson plantation, but she would never tell us who. But I got my suspicions. My Papa Ben Ross was a good storyteller too. When we had the good fortune to have him with us, that is. Papa was the property of Anthony Thompson, who owned a Madison plantation 10 miles south of there. Papa was a skilled woodsman who oversaw other slaves cutting log and timber for the shipbuilding there in Maryland. Oftentimes when the master was in need of money, he rented my papa out to work for a neighbor. And because by then I had done grown strong enough to handle a plow, I was often sent on jobs with my papa. Our chief business was to cut trees, trim off branches, and skid logs to the loading places. When working with my papa, he would tell me of slaves escaping from one plantation or another. Sometimes a slave would make his way north to safety, traveling along the Underground Railroad. Papa would whisper to me. That was the first time I heard about an Underground Railroad, and I thought it must be hidden away like gopher tunnels. But Papa told me that the Underground Railroad was a secret system to help slaves reach the free states and Canada. Still, sometimes slave catchers and their dogs would pick up the trail of runaways, catch him, and bring him back to be flogged. Papa said that this most time happened to first-time runners on account the runaway didn't have enough know-how about tracking and hunting and how to get on with the dogs and set them off their scent. Through Papa's stories, I knew the dangers of runaway, yet the thought of freedom was always within me, glowing like the North Star, and my faith started to grow more and more. Once I was 12 years old, Master Borders hired me out on my own to a man named Barrett. I had gotten accustomed to and preferred the harsh physical work on the plantation rather than doing domestic work and being lorded over by some white woman. One fateful morning, Master Barrett sent me to the market, where I soon spotted a fugitive slave that was known to me and my papa. His overseer was about to come upon him just as he was trying to escape the store. Small as I was overcome with a boldness that caused me to stand in the doorway, blocking the overseer's way, as to give the slave enough time to make his escape. The overseer turned, picked up a heavy metal weight from the counter and aimed it in the direction of the door, missed the slave, hitting me in the head instead. The weight broke my skull and cut a piece of my shawl clean off and drove it into my head. They carried me to the house all bleeding and fainting. I didn't have no bed, no place to lie down on at all, so they laid me on the seat of the loom, and I stayed there all day and the next. It took months for me to recover from the head wound. Much of that time I do not recall. When I was strong enough again, Grandmama Modesty told me that Master Borders tried to sell me while I was down and out, but wasn't able to find a buyer. After that blow to my head, I would fall asleep anywhere, and it was impossible to wake me up. Sleeping spells would come to me without warning. This situation also gave way to more occasions for the hounds to be sent to find me. And it was during this time I started having vivid spiritual dreams related to my calling to be free. Then, nearly 20 years later, a free African man named John Tubman came to work for pay on the Borders plantation there in the Chesapeake Bay. Back then, we'd heard that Baltimore had a large population of free Africans, but not many made their way to our Bucktown farm or nearby plantations. And though Baltimore was only 80 miles north, it seemed as far away as the promised land of the Israelites. I got to work with Freeman John Tubman a lot, and we liked working together. In some ways, it was like working with Papa, because we talk about matters bigger than plantation and slavery. John could read, and oftentimes he talked about the abolitionists, about the American Anti-Slavery Society. I found myself amazed, but with a sense of self-satisfaction that there was many, many whites who didn't have no taste for slavery. Years passed as John traveled the state, hiring himself out as a free man. He brought word of anti-slavery meetings in Philadelphia and the words of one William Lloyd Garrison, who said, "I'm willing to be persecuted and bound for advocating African rights." These words stirred my soul and my longing to be free all the more. Finally, in 1844, John and me was joined as husband and wife. We got along well for some time, but we didn't agree on one great thing that burned in my heart, the need to be free. I asked John to purchase my freedom, but my freedom was no urgent matter to him. So 5 years later, I left Maryland near the Chesapeake Bay, where the plantation lay with swampy lowlands and heavy timbers and thick tangles of brushes, rotten logs, and I made my way with my brothers Harry and Ben to the promised land. We got as far as Baltimore, but Harry and Ben turned back. Not me, though. I pushed my way through that wet, unfriendly countryside, away from roads where slave catchers might be lurking. I traveled by night with no map to follow, only the North Star and moss-lined groves of trees to guide me. One farmer gave me a ride in his wagon under a load of corn. Another farmer, a free colored man, gave me men's clothes to wear. Him and his wife told me where the next house was on the way to Philadelphia. "Is you ready to ride the Underground Railroad?" they'd ask. "Yes, I is," I answered. "I'm ready to ride this train to freedom." They warned me it wouldn't be easy, but I was already more than halfway to the promised land, and I wasn't going to let nobody turn me around then. No, sir. I could taste my freedom like the bloodhounds could taste the blood of a runaway slave. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Finally, after many punishing days, I reached Philadelphia, where I found refuge in the home of a Quaker who ran a station on the Underground. He sent me on to the home of another Quaker where I was safe. My new mistress was kind in every way. She taught me things I should know about doing housework without the lash, and she paid me in cash. I saved my money so I could go back south to rescue my family and friends. I made that trip 13 times over the next 8 years with the help of other friends, white and black, most of which I met through my acquaintance with my abolitionist friend, Lucretia Mott and Frederick Douglass. Oh, I knowed it was dangerous when I first started. The slave catchers, bloodhounds, Southern loyalists, and my sleeping spells. And within a few years, as a conductor, a reward was posted for my capture, dead or alive. By then, I had done set up my own underground stations from Wilmington, Delaware to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, then on to Albany, New York, last stop Syracuse. Come ride my train, I'd say. And good folks like William Stahl, Thomas Garrett, Stephen Myers, and Brother Jeremy Lugan made sure everybody felt welcome when they arrived. When I run in 1849, I knowed I was free and safe from the slave catchers once I crossed the Mason-Dixon line. This was the border between Pennsylvania and Maryland. Then, 7 years later, the United States government set what they called a Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which means if you run and cross into free states, the master can send a catcher to find you. The new law also said any person, male, female, Negro, or white, free or slave, caught aiding a runaway slave by providing food or shelter is subject to 6 months imprisonment and a $1,000 fine. Officers who captured a fugitive slave were entitled to a bonus or promotion for their work. This law made it harder, but my faith taught me that the word is true. Where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. And these laws didn't matter to me because I was like Moses, sent to help set my people free. There, on the Borders plantation, from where I escaped, I was small compared to others in the area. So we slaves were so much more important to them because their livelihood was close-knit to us. But when faced with money troubles, Master Borders started selling slaves all the same. The first ones to go were my older sisters, Mariah, and then Lena and Sophie. It broke the hearts of my mom and papa. Yet they bore it, much like George and Eliza in Uncle Tom's cabin. Then when Master Borders died, all the slaves on our plantation worried mightily about what would happen. Would they get a cruel new master like that Simon Legree? Would they be sold? Or would the families be all the more separated? Master had promised my mom and my grandma Modesty that their freedom would be coming, but he died before he signed the papers. I ran those many years ago with my brothers before I knowed for sure the answer to those questions. And it is those same unanswered questions that brought me back time and again, because these questions were still being asked on every plantation below the Mason-Dixon line. It was what drove my mind and heart to return to the land of these enslaved, no matter the risk of capture and re-enslavement or lynching, to help see others get emancipated. And my Lord done seen to it that I ain't never been caught and ain't never lost a passenger on the Underground Railroad. My last time back was to bring my mama and papa to the new promised land, because in my new home, my first home in Albany, New York, I was no more a stranger. So there I was, not worried about the dogs. They was chasing the ghost of Moses that morning, not me, because old Moses was wearing moccasins wiped down with rabbit grease, and my shoes and pants belonged to one of my conductors from Albany to throw the hounds off of my scent. They would not catch Moses on that run. I owed my papa and my mom more than life for the way they gave all they could to protect me and my brothers and sisters from harm on the plantation. So on my first trip south to help free my niece and her family, who'd done been sold to another plantation, I helped Papa with money to buy his freedom. Then, finally, in a few years, 1855 by then, Papa purchased Mom's freedom from Mistress Eliza Borders for $20, even though she should have been set free when she reached the age of 45. After that, the idea was for them to come north, but they were weary and the way was long. Slave catchers would watch for Moses to come snatch them at every crossroads. We had many narrow escapes. Then early that year, I got word that Papa was in trouble with the authorities for having harbored fugitives in his home. Well, I made my way there in a hurry to help my parents on their run for liberty, on the only run I have ever taken in the summertime. And it was hot. 'Twas all the more reason to travel by night and sleep by day. I knew it wouldn't be no easy passage, because by then they were elderly parents who couldn't walk long distances. So what I did was fitted them a carriage of branches and sackcloth, a practice I learned first from my Nana and from some Iroquois pilgrims who befriended me on my sojourn through the Canadian wilderness. The carriage helped ease the harshness of the Underground Trail to St. Catharines in Canada, where other relatives had done settled. It was a place like we sang of when we played as a family, a place where there was at last no more separation, and we were no more strangers. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord.